My fingernails were digging so deep into the mahogany armrest of the church pew that I could feel splinters catching under them. The pain was nothing compared to what was about to happen. I sat there in the front row of St. Augustine's chapel, in Millbrook Springs, Idaho, surrounded by 300 people who thought they knew my father, Robert Bobby Caldwell. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The entire town had shown up, farmers whose irrigation systems Dad had designed for free during the drought of 2018, small business owners whose shops he'd helped rebuild after the tornado took half of Main Street, kids who were now adults, remembering the man who coached Little League for 15 straight seasons without missing a single game, even when his arthritis got so bad he could barely grip a baseball. They remembered him as the guy who'd show up at your door at midnight if your furnace broke in January, tools in hand, refusing payment. The man who'd taught half the county how to change their oil, fix their plumbing, and build chicken coops that could survive Idaho winters. Bobby Caldwell was Millbrook Springs royalty, the kind of man small towns are built around. But I knew something they didn't. Something that was about to shatter everything they believed about our perfect family. My brother Marcus stood up from the pew beside me, straightening his expensive charcoal suit, the kind that probably cost more than most people in this room made in a month. At 45, he looked like success personified. Perfectly styled salt and pepper hair, $1,000 watch catching the light from the stained glass windows, that confident smile that had been charming people since we were kids. Marcus had flown in from Seattle the night before in his private jet, the successful tech entrepreneur, the son who made it big, the golden boy who'd escaped small-town life to build an empire. Everyone in Millbrook Springs followed his company's stock price like it was the weather forecast. Marcus Caldwell, the local boy who conquered Silicon Valley. He walked to the podium with the same swagger he'd had since high school, when he was quarterback of the Millbrook Mustangs, and I was the quiet sister who helped Mom in the church kitchen after every game. The same confidence he'd displayed when he gave his valedictorian speech, promising to put our little town on the map someday. I watched him adjust the microphone, his movements deliberate and practiced. This wasn't his first time commanding a tea room. As CEO of TechFlow Solutions, Marcus had given keynote speeches to thousands, been featured on magazine covers, interviewed on business shows. Public speaking was his specialty. Thank you all for being here today. His voice carried perfectly through the chapel's sound system. Dad would have been amazed to see so many faces. Though knowing him, he probably would have started counting how many chairs we'd need for lunch afterward. Gentle laughter rippled through the crowd. Classic Marcus, starting with humor to win them over. Robert Caldwell was many things to many people. A mentor, a friend, a helper, a teacher. But to Marcus and me, he paused, his voice catching slightly. He was our hero. My stomach twisted. Here it comes. The last time I spoke with him, just 3 weeks ago, he pulled me aside. Marcus's voice grew softer, more intimate, drawing everyone in. He told me something I'll never forget. He said, "Marcus, I need you to know, I'm proudest of you. You took risks, you built something lasting, you never gave up when things got tough." The chapel was silent except for the soft sounds of people crying. Mrs. Henderson from the hardware store was dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Pastor Williams was nodding approvingly. Even my teenage son Caleb, who was sitting beside me, shifted uncomfortably. But I felt like I was going to be sick, because 3 weeks ago, Dad couldn't even remember Marcus's name. 3 weeks ago, Dad was in the final stages of Alzheimer's, barely speaking, sometimes not recognizing me, and I was there every single day. I was the one who moved back to Millbrook Springs 2 years ago when the diagnosis came. I was the one who sold my marketing business in Boise, left my career, my friends, my life, to take care of him. Marcus hadn't visited in 8 months. He told me he was proud because I'd honored the Caldwell name, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger. Because I'd shown the world that small-town values could build big dreams. He said I was proof that you don't have to choose between staying true to your roots and reaching for the stars. More nods, more tears. Someone actually said amen from the back row. I could feel my son Caleb's eyes on me. At 17, he was old enough to understand what was happening. He'd spent the last 2 years helping me care for his grandfather. He'd seen the reality, the confused nights, the forgotten names, the man who'd once built half this town struggling to remember how to tie his shoes. Caleb reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small and silver. Dad's old digital camera, the one he'd used to record family birthdays and Christmas mornings back when his mind was sharp. The one we'd found in his desk drawer last week while cleaning out his study. My heart stopped when I realized what my son was thinking, because that camera contained something that would destroy everything Marcus had just said. Something that would reveal not just his lie, but a truth about our family that would change how everyone in this room saw the Caldwell name forever. Caleb looked at me with those serious brown eyes, so much like his grandfather's, and whispered, just loud enough for me to hear, "Mom, should I show them what Grandpa really said?" The weight of that camera in his 17-year-old hands felt like it could crush us all. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My sow. Name is Rebecca Caldwell Mason, though most people in Millbrook Springs still call me Becca, like I'm still the 17-year-old girl who used to stack hay bales on the Morrison farm every summer. I'm 42 now, a single mother who's been divorced for 3 years from a man who decided that small-town life wasn't ambitious enough for his marketing executive dreams. Caleb is my everything. 17 years old, captain of the debate, team honor roll student who got early acceptance to Idaho State University. He's got his grandfather's hands, strong, capable, gentle, and his grandfather's heart. The kind of kid who spends his weekends helping elderly neighbors with their yard work instead of hanging out at the mall in Twin Falls like most teenagers. For the past 2 years, while I've been Dad's primary caregiver, Caleb has been my partner, in ways no teenager should have to be. He's the one who helped me lift Dad out of bed when the Alzheimer's made him forget how to stand. He's the one who sat with his grandfather during the worst episodes, reading aloud from the same Western novels Dad had loved for decades, even when Dad could no longer follow the plot. Marcus, my older brother by 3 years, lives in a completely different world. His penthouse apartment in Seattle overlooks Elliott Bay. His wife Sophia is a former model who now runs a high-end interior design firm. Their twin daughters, Madison and Mackenzie, both 15, attend private school and speak 3 languages each. They vacation in the Maldives and spend weekends at their cabin in Aspen Tech Flow Solutions, Marcus's company, develops software for agricultural automation. The irony isn't lost on me that he's made millions helping farmers be more efficient, while I'm the one who actually stayed to help the farmers in our hometown. His company went public 4 years ago, making him worth somewhere north of $50 million, according to the business magazines that love to feature him as small-town boy makes tech fortune. But here's what those magazines don't know. Marcus hasn't been home for Christmas in 5 years. He missed Dad's 70th birthday, his 71st, and his 72nd. When Dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's 2 years ago, Marcus sent a check for $25,000 and a card that read, "For whatever you need. Sorry I can't be there right now. Big merger happening." The check helped pay for Dad's medical equipment, but it couldn't sit with him at 3 a.m. when he woke up confused and scared, calling for our mother who'd been dead for 8 years. Money couldn't explain to him 20 times a day why his workshop tools were locked away for his own safety, or why he couldn't drive to the hardware store anymore. I'm the one who gave up my successful marketing consultancy in Boise. I'm the one who moved back into our childhood home on Maple Creek Road. The same house where Dad taught us to fish in the creek behind the barn, where Mom used to grow tomatoes that won the county fair 3 years running. I'm the one who learned how to manage medications, navigate insurance claims, and find the patience to answer the same question 40 times in an hour. Caleb adjusted his entire teenage life around his grandfather's needs. He chose not to play varsity basketball so he could be home to help after school. He turned down a summer program at Boise State so he could stay and help me during Dad's worst months. His friends understand. In small towns like Millbrook Springs, everyone knows what it means to take care of family. But to the outside world, to the people reading business magazines and following TechFlow Solutions' stock price, Marcus is the success story. The Caldwell son who made something of himself. The one who honored the family name by building an empire. I'm just the daughter who never left home. The one who couldn't hack it in the big city. The one who came crawling back when life got hard. Except that's not the story at all. And what's on that camera in Caleb's hands proves it. 3 months ago, during one of Dad's lucid moments, they were becoming rarer and rarer. He grabbed my wrist while I was helping him with his medication. His eyes focused on mine with startling clarity, like someone had turned the lights back on in a dark room. "Becca," he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I need to tell you something before I forget everything completely." That's when he asked for his old camera. The same silver digital camera he'd used to record our high school graduations, family barbecues, and Christmas mornings. I found it in his desk drawer, buried under old tax documents and faded photographs of better times. He held that camera like it contained his last connection to the world, to us, to the man he used to be. With shaking hands but a steady voice, he recorded a message that would change everything. When he finished, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "Make sure they know the truth, Becca. Promise me." I promised. But I never imagined it would come to this. Sitting in a church pew, watching my brother lie to 300 people about a conversation that never happened, while my 17-year-old son holds the evidence that could destroy our family's reputation forever. The stakes couldn't be higher. Marcus's entire identity, his business relationships, his standing in our community. It's all built on the image of the dutiful son who honored his father while building his empire. If the truth comes out, it doesn't just expose his lie. It reveals 2 years of abandonment, of letting his sister carry the entire burden while he built his fortune. But more than that, it would finally show everyone in Millbrook Springs who really deserves to be called Bobby Caldwell's legacy. The question is, are we brave enough to let the truth destroy the comfortable lie everyone wants to believe? The pattern started when we were kids, so gradually that I didn't even notice it happening. Marcus was always the golden child, 3 years older, naturally athletic, charismatic in that effortless way that made adults light up when he walked into a room. I was the quiet one, the helper, the daughter who disappeared into the background, while Marcus commanded center stage. In elementary school, when Marcus won the science fair with his volcano project, Dad drove all over 3 counties showing it off to anyone who would look. When I won the county spelling bee 2 years later, Dad patted my head and said, "Good job, honey," before going back to reading the newspaper. It wasn't malicious. Dad loved me in his way. But Marcus's achievements were events to be celebrated, while mine were just expected. High school made the divide even clearer. Marcus was quarterback of the Millbrook Mustangs, student body president, and valedictorian. Dad never missed a single football game, standing in the bleachers wearing his Letterman jacket from his own high school days, beaming with pride every time Marcus threw a touchdown pass. The hardware store, the feed supply shop, the diner. Everywhere Dad went, people wanted to talk about his son, the quarterback. I was editor of the school newspaper, captain of the debate team, and graduated 3rd in my class. But there were no crowds cheering for debate tournaments held in empty classrooms on Tuesday afternoons. No one asked Dad how his daughter's editorial about the town's recycling program was coming along. I learned early that in the Caldwell family, there was room for one star, and Marcus had claimed that spotlight long before I understood what I was competing for. The real breaking point came during our senior years, Marcus's senior year, my sophomore year. Dad had always talked about the family business he wanted to start, Caldwell Construction and Design. He'd been saving money for years, planning to teach Marcus everything about building, contracting, and running a business. It was going to be their legacy together. But Marcus had other plans. He'd been accepted to Stanford University with a partial football scholarship and a pre-business major. When he announced at dinner that he was leaving Millbrook Springs for California, I watched Dad's face crumble like a controlled demolition. All those dreams of working side by side, building something together, passed down through generations. Gone in one conversation. "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, Dad," Marcus had said, his voice gentle but firm. "I can come back and help the family business later, but I can't get this chance again." Dad nodded and smiled, but I saw him throw away the business plans he'd been sketching for months. I saw him cancel the appointment with the bank about a construction loan, and I saw him pour himself a whiskey that night and sit on the back porch, staring at the stars until well past midnight. That's when I made my choice. I was 16 years old, watching my father's dreams disappear, and I decided someone in this family was going to be there for him. I changed my own college plans from journalism at University of Idaho to business administration at Boise State, close enough to come home on weekends, practical enough to actually help Dad build something. But Marcus was already gone, and in his absence, he somehow became larger than life. His college football career, his business degree, his early success in Seattle's tech scene. Every achievement was a story Dad told with pride to anyone who would listen. "My son Marcus" became Dad's favorite phrase, the son who was conquering the world while representing Millbrook Springs values. Meanwhile, I graduated college and came home to help Dad finally start Caldwell Construction. We built it together from nothing, me handling the business side, Dad doing the actual construction, work he'd always loved. We were good at it, really good. Within 5 years, we'd built half the new houses in Millbrook Springs and 3 of the biggest commercial buildings in the county. But when people congratulated Dad on his success, he'd always deflect. "Well, Marcus gave me the idea for the business model," he'd say, even though Marcus had never shown any interest in construction. He taught me about incorporating and tax strategies during one of his visits home. It wasn't true. I'd handled all the legal and financial aspects. But Dad seemed to need Marcus to be part of the story somehow. The visits home became less frequent as Marcus's career took off. Thanksgiving every other year. Christmas every 3rd year. Always with good reasons. Important business trips, family vacations with Sophia's relatives, work commitments that couldn't be moved. Dad would make excuses for him to everyone in town. "You know how it is with successful people," he'd say. "Marcus is building something important up there in Seattle. When I got married to David Mason at 28, Marcus was supposed to be at the wedding." He RSVP'd yes. Dad had prepared a speech about both his children settling down in their own ways. But 3 days before the ceremony, Marcus called to say TechFlow had an emergency investor meeting he couldn't miss. Dad gave the speech anyway, spending half of it talking about Marcus's important work and how proud he was that his son was changing the world through technology. When Caleb was born, Marcus sent a silver rattle from Tiffany and a card promising to visit soon to meet his nephew. That visit happened when Caleb was 18 months old. By then, Marcus was focused on expanding TechFlow internationally, and family visits became even more rare. The hardest part wasn't Marcus's absence. It was watching Dad create stories to fill the gaps. When Caleb started Little League, Dad would tell the other parents how Marcus had called with batting tips, even though I knew Marcus hadn't called in months. When we won the contract to build the new community center, Dad told everyone that Marcus had advised him on the bidding strategy from Seattle, even though Marcus knew nothing about construction contracts. Dad needed Marcus to be part of our lives, even when he wasn't. And Marcus was happy to let Dad create whatever narrative made him feel better, as long as it didn't require actual participation. The pattern reached its peak when Mom got sick. Pancreatic cancer, diagnosed stage 4, 6 months to live. I took a leave of absence from the construction business to care for her full-time. Marcus sent flowers and called twice a week, but never came home during those terrible 6 months. Not once. When Mom died, Marcus flew in for the funeral, gave a beautiful eulogy about her strength and grace, and flew back to Seattle the next day. Dad told everyone how Marcus had wanted to stay longer, but had important business responsibilities. "That's the price of success," Dad would say, as if Marcus's absence was actually evidence of his importance. After Mom's funeral, Dad seemed to age 10 years overnight. The construction business became too much for him to handle alone, and I could see his mind starting to slip in small ways, forgetting appointments, repeating stories, losing track of tools he'd used for decades. But still, every conversation, with neighbors included updates about Marcus's latest business successes, as if his achievements could somehow make up for his absence. When the Alzheimer's diagnosis came 2 years ago, I called Marcus immediately. His response was swift and practical. "Whatever you need, Becca, money, equipment, the best doctors, just tell me what it costs." But when I asked if he could come home to help make decisions about Dad's care, there was always a reason why it wasn't possible. "You're so much better at this caregiving stuff than I am," he'd say during our monthly phone calls. "Dad needs someone patient and gentle. That's always been your strength." It sounded like a compliment, but it felt like another way of saying this was my job, not his. The daughter's job. The one who'd never left home, never built anything important, never had anywhere more pressing to be. But Dad's pride in Marcus never wavered, even as his memory faded. During his confused episodes, he'd ask me when Marcus was coming to visit, and I'd have to explain over and over that Marcus was busy with important work in Seattle. Sometimes Dad would nod knowingly and say, "That boy's going to change the world. I always knew it." Those words cut deeper every time, because I was the one changing Dad's world every single day. Feeding him, bathing him, keeping him safe, holding his hand through the terror of forgetting everything he'd ever known. But in Dad's mind, even as it slipped away piece by piece, Marcus remained the son who mattered most. That's the pattern that brought us to this moment. 40 years of Marcus being celebrated for his absence while I was invisible in my presence. 40 years of Dad creating stories to justify why the golden child couldn't be bothered to come home. But that camera in Caleb's hands holds something different. Something that might finally break the pattern that's defined our family for as long as I can remember. It was a Tuesday morning in late February when everything changed. Dad had been having more bad days than good ones, and I'd barely slept in weeks. The winter had been brutal. Millbrook Springs was buried under 3 feet of snow, and the isolation made Dad's confusion worse. Some days he thought Mom was still alive and would spend hours calling for her. Other days he forgot who I was entirely and would ask when his daughter was coming to visit. Caleb had stayed home from school that day because Dad had fallen during the night trying to get to the bathroom alone. Nothing was broken, thank God, but it scared us both enough that we decided someone needed to be with him at all times. I was exhausted, running on coffee and determination, trying to figure out how we were going to manage if Dad's condition kept deteriorating. That's when Dr. Patricia Hendricks from the county hospice program came for her weekly visit. Dr. Hendricks was one of those rare people who seemed to understand that caring for someone with Alzheimer's meant caring for the whole family, not just the patient. She'd been working with us for 6 months, helping us navigate the impossible decisions that come with watching someone you love disappear piece by piece. After examining Dad, she pulled me aside in the kitchen while Caleb sat with his grandfather in the living room. reading aloud from one of Dad's favorite Louis L'Amour westerns. "Rebecca," Dr. Hendricks said gently, "we need to talk about the next phase. Your father's cognitive decline has accelerated significantly in the past month. I think it's time to consider more intensive care options." The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been dreading this conversation for months, knowing it was coming but hoping we could somehow delay it indefinitely. "How much time are we talking about?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "With Alzheimer's, it's always difficult to predict," she said, her voice professional but kind. "But given the rate of progression, I'd estimate we're looking at weeks rather than months before he needs 24-hour professional care." "And Rebecca?" She paused, studying my face. "I'm also concerned about you. You're exhibiting signs of severe caregiver burnout. When's the last time you had a full night's sleep?" I couldn't remember. Probably sometime in December. "I know this is overwhelming," Dr. Hendricks continued, "but there are some conversations you might want to have with your father while he's still capable of lucid moments. Sometimes patients have things they want to say, messages they want to leave for family members. The window for that kind of meaningful communication is closing." After she left, I sat in Dad's old recliner and cried for the first time in months. Not the silent tears I'd learned to shed while doing laundry or washing dishes, but deep shaking sobs that came from a place I'd been trying to keep locked away. Caleb found me there an hour later and just sat on the arm of the chair, not saying anything, just being present in that way teenagers can be when they understand that words won't help. "Mom," he said finally, "maybe Dr. Hendricks is right. Maybe we should try to talk to Grandpa while he's still him." That evening, Dad had one of his clearer moments. They'd been coming less frequently, but when they did, it was like watching someone surface from deep water, gasping for air and awareness. He was sitting at the kitchen table where he'd eaten thousands of meals, looking out the window at the snow-covered pasture where he used to keep horses. "Becca," he said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been in days, "come sit with me." I pulled up the chair beside him, the same chair where I'd done homework as a kid while Mom cooked dinner and Dad told stories about his day. His hand found mine, and I was surprised by how warm it felt. For weeks, his hands had been cold, trembling, disconnected from his intentions. "I know I'm losing myself," he said, his eyes focused on mine with startling clarity. "Some days I can feel my mind slipping away like water through my fingers. But right now, right this moment, I can see everything clearly." My throat tightened. These moments of lucidity were precious and heartbreaking in equal measure. "I need to tell you something," he continued, his grip on my hand tightening. "Before I forget how to say it. Before I forget why it matters." I waited, afraid to speak and break whatever spell was allowing him to be present with me. "Your brother Marcus called this morning," he said, and my heart sank. Marcus hadn't called in 3 weeks. "No, wait." Dad paused, confusion flickering across his face before clearing again. "Not this morning. Last month. Time is difficult for me now. But he called, and we talked about you." I felt a familiar stab of anxiety. What had Marcus said? Had he finally suggested that Dad would be better off in a care facility? Had he complained about the cost of Dad's medications? Had he expressed concern that I wasn't handling things properly? "He asked me about you," Dad continued, his voice growing stronger. "About how you've been taking care of me. And I realized, Becca, I've never told you. All these years I've never said what I should have said." The kitchen was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Caleb practicing piano in the living room. Snow continued to fall outside the window, blanketing the world in silence. "I was wrong," Dad said simply. "For so many years, I was wrong about what mattered. I was so proud of Marcus for leaving, for building something big and important. I thought that's what success looked like. Making money, getting famous, conquering the world. His eyes filled with tears, but his voice remained steady. But you, Becca, you stayed. You gave up your own dreams to help me build mine. You came home when I needed you. You've sacrificed everything to take care of me, and I've never thanked you properly. I've never told you how proud I am, how grateful. I was crying now, but I didn't want to interrupt him. These words felt too important, too long overdue. I want to record something, he said suddenly, his eyes lighting up with purpose. Something you can keep. Something that tells the truth about who you are, about what you've done for this family. Will you help me do that? That's when I remembered the camera. Dad's old digital camera that had captured so many family moments over the years. I found it in his desk drawer, buried under insurance paperwork and old tax returns. The battery was dead, but I found the charger in a kitchen drawer, wound around a collection of rubber bands and paper clips. While the camera charged, Dad seemed to gather his thoughts, his mind working with a clarity I hadn't seen in months. I need to do this now, he said, while I can still remember what I want to say, while I can still find the words. An hour later, we sat in his study, the same room where he'd taught me to balance checkbooks and fill out business forms, where we'd planned the expansion of Caldwell construction, where I'd helped him organize his tools and equipment catalogs. The camera sat on his desk, its small screen glowing in the lamplight. "Are you sure about this, Dad?" I asked. Part of me was terrified of what he might say, afraid that in his confusion he might say something hurtful or contradictory. But his eyes were clear, more focused than they'd been in months. "I've never been more sure of anything," he said. "I need to tell the truth, Becca. I need to say what I should have said years ago." He looked directly into the camera lens, and I pressed record. What happened next would change everything. In 6 minutes and 43 seconds, my father said things that would shatter every assumption our family and community had about the Caldwell legacy. Things that would expose 40 years of misplaced pride and invisible sacrifice. Things that would finally, definitively, set the record straight about which child had truly honored their father's values. When he finished speaking, he leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. "I can rest now." Within hours, the confusion returned. By the next morning, he'd forgotten we'd made the recording at all. But the camera held his words, his final act of clarity and courage, waiting for the moment when the truth would be needed most. I had no idea that moment would come at his funeral, with 300 people listening to Marcus lie about conversations that never happened, while my 17-year-old son held the evidence that would change everything. I didn't watch the recording that night. I couldn't. The emotional weight of seeing Dad so lucid, so purposeful, followed by his immediate return to confusion was too much to bear. The camera sat on my nightstand for 3 days, its small silver form seeming to pulse with the weight of whatever truth it contained. Caleb found me staring at it on Friday evening, sitting on the edge of my bed like I was afraid to touch it. "You haven't watched it yet, have you?" he said, settling beside me with the easy intuition that had made him such a good caregiver for his grandfather. I shook my head. What if it's not what I hope it is? What if his mind was already too far gone, even during that lucid moment? What if he said things that don't make sense, or worse, what if he said things that hurt? Caleb picked up the camera, turning it over, in his hands. At 17, he had an emotional maturity that sometimes startled me. 2 years of helping care for his grandfather had aged him in ways I wished he didn't have to experience, but it had also given him a depth of understanding about life and loss that most adults never develop. "Mom," he said quietly. Grandpa was more himself that night than he'd been in months. You saw his eyes. You heard his voice. Whatever he said, he meant it. Together, we sat on my bed and pressed play. The camera's small screen showed Dad in his study, sitting behind the old oak desk that had belonged to his father before him. The lamplight cast gentle shadows across his face, and for a moment, looking at the recording, you could almost forget about the Alzheimer's. He looked like the Bobby Caldwell who had built half of Millbrook Springs, who had coached Little League for 15 years, who had been the steady center of our family for so long. His voice, when he began to speak, was stronger and clearer than it had been in months. My name is Robert Caldwell, and if someone is watching this, it means I'm gone and there are things that need to be said. Things I should have said years ago, but was too proud, or too stubborn, or too scared to admit. He paused, gathering his thoughts, his hands folded on the desk in front of him. I have 2 children, Marcus and Rebecca, and for most of their lives, I got it backwards. I spent 40 years being proud of the wrong things, celebrating the wrong achievements, and failing to see what was right in front of me. My breath caught in my throat. Beside me, Caleb reached for my hand. Marcus is successful. There's no denying that. He built a company worth millions of dollars. He lives in a big city, travels the world, has his picture in magazines. For years, I bragged about him to anyone who would listen. My son, the tech entrepreneur, I'd say. My son who conquered Silicon Valley. I thought his success reflected well on me, on our family, on the values we'd taught him. Dad's voice grew quieter, more reflective. But success isn't just about money or fame or building something big. Real success is about character. It's about showing up when people need you. It's about sacrifice and dedication and love that doesn't ask for recognition. He looked directly into the camera, and it felt like he was looking directly at me. Rebecca gave up her own business to help me start Caldwell Construction. She came home every weekend during college to help with the books, to learn the trade, to be my partner in building something together. When her mother got sick, Rebecca took a leave of absence to be her full-time caregiver. When I got this damn disease, she moved back home, gave up her life in Boise, gave up her career to take care of me. His voice began to shake with emotion. Marcus sent money. Don't get me wrong, the money helped. But money can't sit with you at 3 a.m. when you're scared and confused. Money can't help you remember how to tie your shoes or explain why you can't drive anymore. Money can't hold your hand when you're dying. I was crying now, but I didn't want to look away from the screen. Rebecca has been holding my hand for 2 years. She's fed me, bathed me, kept me safe, kept me human when this disease tried to take that away from me. She sacrificed everything, her business, her social life, her chance at remarriage, her own dreams, to make sure I could die with dignity in the home I love. Dad wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, but his voice grew stronger. And Marcus? Marcus hasn't been home for Christmas in 3 years. He missed his mother's birthday every year for the last 5 years of her life. He sent flowers to her funeral and left the next day. He calls me once a month, if I'm lucky, and those calls are usually about business or weather or anything except the fact that his father is disappearing piece by piece. The camera captured every word, every pause, every moment of painful honesty. I know people in town think Marcus is the success story. The son who made something of himself. The one who brought honor to the Caldwell name. But they're wrong. They're all wrong. He leaned forward, his eyes intense with purpose. Rebecca is my success story. She's the one who learned what it means to love without conditions. She's the one who understands that family isn't about what you can achieve for yourself. It's about what you'll sacrifice for each other. She's the one who embodies every value I ever tried to teach my children. Dad's voice broke completely then, and he had to pause to compose himself. If I could do it over again, I would spend less time bragging about Marcus's money and more time celebrating Rebecca's heart. I would tell everyone in Millbrook Springs that my daughter is the strongest, most dedicated, most loving person I've ever known. I would make sure she knew every single day how proud I am of who she is. He looked directly at the camera again, and I could swear he was looking at me. Rebecca, if you're watching this, I need you to know. I was proud of Marcus for what he accomplished. But I'm proud of you for who you are. You stayed when leaving would have been easier. You loved when loving required everything you had to give. You honored our family not by making money or getting famous, but by living the values your mother and I tried to teach you. The recording showed him wiping away tears, but his voice remained steady and clear. Marcus will probably speak at my funeral. He's good with words, always has been. He'll say nice things about me, about our family, about the values we shared. But if he claims I was proudest of him, if he suggests that his achievements were what mattered most to me, then he's lying, either to himself or to everyone else. Dad's final words were spoken with absolute conviction. The truth is this: Rebecca is the child I'm most proud of. She's the one who truly understood what it means to be a Caldwell. She's the one who showed me what real success looks like. And if anyone in this family deserves to be celebrated, to be honored, to be remembered as the embodiment of everything good about our family, it's her. He sat back in his chair, looking exhausted but peaceful. That's the truth. That's what I want people to know. That's my final word on the matter. The recording ended with Dad reaching forward to turn off the camera, his hand steady and sure. The room was silent except for the sound of both Caleb and me crying. But these weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of validation, of finally hearing the words I'd waited my entire life to hear. "Mom," Caleb whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Everyone needs to hear this." I nodded, understanding for the first time that this recording wasn't just Dad's final gift to me. It was his final act of courage, his way of setting the record straight, his attempt to undo 40 years of misplaced priorities and unspoken truths. But I also knew that sharing it would change everything. It would expose Marcus's lies, destroy his carefully crafted image, and force our entire family and community to confront the difference between success and significance. The question was, did I have the courage to honor Dad's final wish, even if it meant destroying the comfortable fiction everyone wanted to believe? The 3 days between watching Dad's recording and his funeral were the longest of my life. I carried that camera with me everywhere, tucked in my purse like a secret weapon I wasn't sure I had the courage to use. Every time I looked at it, I could hear Dad's voice saying, "That's the truth. That's what I want people to know." But knowing what I should do and having the strength to do it were two completely different things. Marcus arrived on Saturday evening, the night before the funeral, in his typical whirlwind fashion. His driver picked him up at the Boise airport, apparently flying commercial this time instead of the private jet, and brought him straight to the family home on Maple Creek Road. I was in the kitchen preparing food for the post-funeral gathering when his rental car pulled into the driveway. Through the window, I watched him step out wearing a perfectly tailored black overcoat, his silver hair styled immaculately despite the long travel day. Even in grief, Marcus looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a business magazine. His wife Sophia emerged from the passenger side, blonde and elegant in designer morning attire that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Their twins, Madison and Mackenzie, followed reluctantly. At 15, they were beautiful. Girls who'd inherited their parents' polished good looks, but they moved with the uncomfortable stiffness of teenagers who'd been dragged to a family obligation they didn't understand. They'd only met their grandfather a handful of times, and I could see in their faces that they were here out of duty, not love. "Rebecca!" Marcus's voice boomed as he entered through the back door, arms spread wide for an embrace. "God, it's good to see you. You look—" He paused, studying my face with what might have been genuine concern. "You look tired. This has been so hard on you." I let him hug me, feeling the expensive fabric of his coat, smelling his cologne that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. For a moment, I almost let myself believe in his concern, in the possibility that beneath all the success and distance, he was still my big brother who cared about me. "I'm okay," I said, stepping back. It's been difficult, but Caleb and I managed. "Where is my nephew?" Marcus asked, looking around the kitchen that had barely changed since our childhood. "I brought him something from Seattle." Caleb appeared in the doorway as if summoned, and I watched my son take in his uncle's appearance with the same careful assessment he used for everything these days. At 17, Caleb had developed a radar for authenticity that came from spending 2 years caring for someone whose mind could no longer filter truth from fiction. "Uncle Marcus," Caleb said politely, accepting a handshake that Marcus seemed to want to turn into a hug. "I'm sorry about Grandpa." "Thank you, Caleb. He was so proud of you, you know. He talked about you all the time during our phone calls." I felt a familiar stab of irritation. Dad had barely mentioned Caleb during Marcus's infrequent calls, mainly because those calls were usually brief and focused on Marcus's business updates or travel schedule. But this was how Marcus operated, creating touching family moments that existed only in his imagination. Sophia and the twins made polite conversation about the house, the town, their memories of Grandpa Bobby. It was clear they were performing grief rather than feeling it, but I couldn't entirely blame them. How do you mourn someone you barely knew? How do you feel loss for a relationship that never really existed? That evening, we sat around the kitchen table, the same table where Dad had recorded his message just days earlier, and Marcus took charge of the funeral arrangements with the efficiency of someone accustomed to managing complex situations. "I've been thinking about the service," he said, pulling out his phone to check notes he'd apparently made during the flight. "Obviously, Pastor Williams will handle the religious aspects, but I think we should have some family sharing as well. Personal remembrances, stories that capture who Dad really was." I nodded, wondering if Marcus had any idea who Dad really was beyond the carefully curated image he'd constructed over the years. "I'd like to speak," Marcus continued. "I have some thoughts about Dad's legacy, about the values he instilled in us, about how his influence shaped both our lives." He looked at me across the table. "Would you like to say something too, Rebecca? I know you spent so much time with him these last few years." The question felt loaded, like a test I wasn't sure how to pass. If I said yes, would I have the courage to tell the truth? If I said no, would I be letting Dad down, abandoning my promise to make sure people knew the real story? "I'll think about it," I said finally. Caleb was quiet during most of the conversation, but I could feel him watching me, could sense him thinking about the camera upstairs in my bedroom. We'd talked about it again that afternoon, about whether we had an obligation to share Dad's final message, about what it would mean for our family if the truth came out. "Mom," he'd said, "what would Grandpa want us to do?" It was such a simple question, but it cut straight to the heart of everything. What would Dad want? He'd made that recording for a reason. He'd looked directly into the camera and said he wanted people to know the truth. But he'd also lived his entire life avoiding confrontation, creating stories to smooth over uncomfortable realities. Sunday morning arrived gray and cold, with fresh snow dusting the streets of Millbrook Springs. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, trying to decide what to wear to bury my father, and caught sight of the camera on my dresser. Such a small thing to hold such enormous power. Caleb knocked on my door as I was putting on my earrings, simple pearls that had belonged to Mom. "Can I come in?" He sat on the edge of my bed, dressed in the black suit we'd bought for his debate team competitions, looking older than his 17 years. "I keep thinking about what Uncle Marcus said last night," he began, "about Dad's legacy and the values he instilled. Do you think Uncle Marcus really believes the stories he tells about himself and Grandpa?" It was a perceptive question, and I realized Caleb had been watching and listening more carefully than I'd given him credit for. "I think Marcus has told those stories so many times that they've become real to him," I said. "When you create a narrative about your life and repeat it often enough, it stops feeling like fiction." "But what about everyone else?" What about the people at the funeral who are going to hear Uncle Marcus talk about being Dad's favorite? About all the conversations they had about how proud Grandpa was of his success? Caleb's questions were getting closer to the heart of the matter. They'll believe him, I admitted. Marcus is charismatic, successful, confident. People want to believe that success stories are also virtue stories. It makes them feel better about the world. Even when it's not true? Especially when it's not true. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, turning something over in his mind. Mom, I've been thinking about this a lot, about truth and lies and family loyalty, about what we owe to Grandpa and what we owe to ourselves. I waited, sensing he was working toward something important. I think Grandpa made that recording because he knew Uncle Marcus would do exactly what he's planning to do today. He knew Marcus would get up there and rewrite history, and he wanted us to have the truth as a counterbalance. My 17-year-old son was showing wisdom that surpassed my own. But Mom, here's what I keep coming back to. If we don't share Grandpa's message, if we let Uncle Marcus tell his version of the story, then we're not just letting Grandpa down. We're letting down everyone who's ever felt invisible, everyone who's ever been the caregiver instead of the celebrated one, everyone who's ever wondered if their quiet sacrifices matter. Tears stung my eyes as I realized Caleb understood the stakes better than I did. This isn't just about our family, he continued. It's about truth itself, about whether we have the courage to speak it, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it changes everything. I looked at my son, this remarkable young man who'd grown up helping care for his grandfather, who'd learned compassion and strength through service rather than success. And I knew he was right. So what do you think we should do? I asked. Caleb reached over and picked up the camera, holding it carefully in his hands. I think we should take this to the funeral, he said quietly. And I think we should be ready to use it if we need to. The weight of that decision settled over both of us. We were choosing truth over peace, courage over comfort, Dad's final wish over family harmony. As we prepared to leave for St. Augustine's Chapel, I slipped the camera into my purse, feeling its weight like a promise I was finally ready to keep. The moment Marcus finished his speech, the chapel fell into that reverent silence that follows a performance everyone knows was expertly delivered. I could hear soft murmurs of approval, the rustle of tissues, someone whispering "beautiful" from the back rows. Marcus had done exactly what I'd expected. Painted himself as the devoted son who'd carried on meaningful conversations with Dad, about pride and legacy, conversations that had never happened. But as he stepped down from the podium, something shifted in the energy of the room. I felt Caleb's hand slip into mine, and when I looked at him, I saw a determination in his eyes that reminded me so much of his grandfather that my breath caught. "Mom," he whispered, so quietly only I could hear. "It's time." My heart hammered against my ribs as Caleb stood up. The movement was subtle at first, just a teenager rising from his seat, but in the front row of a funeral, every gesture carries weight. People began to notice. I watched heads turn, saw curious expressions, felt the collective attention of 300 people beginning to focus on my son. Marcus, who had been accepting condolences near the casket, looked up with a puzzled expression. Pastor Williams, who had been preparing to move into the final hymn, paused uncertainly. The chapel's acoustics were such that even small sounds carried, and the silence was becoming noticeable. Caleb reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the silver camera. The gesture was simple, almost casual, but something about the way he held it, like it contained something precious and dangerous, made the entire room go still. "Excuse me?" Caleb said, his voice carrying clearly through the chapel. At 17, his voice had the steady quality of someone who'd learned to speak truth regardless of the audience. "I have something that I think everyone should hear." The silence. that followed was different from the respectful quiet after Marcus's speech. This was the kind of silence that comes when everyone knows something significant is about to happen, but no one knows what. Marcus took a step forward, his polished composure showing the first crack of uncertainty. "Caleb, what are you doing, Uncle Tuts?" "Marcus," Caleb said, his voice respectful but unwavering. "You just told everyone that Grandpa said he was proudest of you, that he believed you honored the family name through your success." The congregation held its collective breath. Even the small children seemed to sense the gravity of the moment and had gone completely quiet. "That's right," Marcus said, though something in his tone suggested he was beginning to understand that his nephew wasn't simply seeking clarification. Caleb held up the camera. 3 days before Grandpa died, during one of his lucid moments, he recorded a message. He asked my mom to help him, and he said he wanted to tell the truth about our family, about which of his children he was really proudest of. I could feel the energy in the room change like the pressure drop before a thunderstorm. People leaned forward in their pews. Marcus's face went pale, and I saw his wife Sophia reach for his arm. "Caleb," Marcus said, his voice taking on a warning tone. "This isn't the time or place for—" "Actually," Caleb interrupted, his teenage voice cutting through his uncle's authority with startling effectiveness. "This is exactly the time and place. Because Grandpa recorded this message specifically for moments like this, when someone might not tell the truth about who he really was and what he really valued." Pastor Williams stepped forward, clearly unsure how to handle this unprecedented situation. "Perhaps we could discuss this after the service." "No," Caleb said firmly. "With respect, Pastor Williams, my grandfather wanted people to hear this. He looked directly into this camera and said he wanted everyone to know the truth about our family." I stood up then, my legs shaking but my resolve finally crystallizing. For 42 years I'd let other people control the narrative about my worth, my contributions, my place in the family. But Dad had given me this gift, his final act of courage and honesty, and I wasn't going to let fear keep me from honoring it. "Caleb's right," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the chapel. "Dad recorded this message because he knew that after his death, people would remember the stories they wanted to believe, not necessarily the truth." Marcus's composure was cracking visibly now. "Rebecca, please, this is our father's funeral." Can't we just what?" I asked, finding strength I didn't know I had. "Let you rewrite history? Let you claim credit for a relationship that existed only in your imagination, while the people who actually cared for him stay silent?" The congregation was completely riveted now. I could see faces I'd known my entire life: Mrs. Henderson from the hardware store, Tom Bradley who'd worked construction with Dad, Sarah Chen who'd taught both Marcus and me in high school, all watching this family drama unfold with the horrified fascination of people witnessing something they knew they'd talk about for years. "I was here," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "For 2 years I was here. I fed him, bathed him, held his hand through the confusion and fear of losing his mind. I gave up my business, my life in Boise, my chance at rebuilding after my divorce, to make sure he could die with dignity in the home he loved. Tears were streaming down my face, but I pressed on, and Marcus sent money, which helped, genuinely. But when Dad was scared at 3 a.m, when he couldn't remember how to tie his shoes, when he needed someone to explain why he couldn't drive anymore, where were you, Marcus? Where were you for Christmas the last 3 years? Where were you when Mom was dying? Where were you when Dad needed his son?" The chapel was so quiet I could hear the heating system cycling on. Marcus's face had gone from pale to red, and I could see him struggling between anger and what might have been shame. "You want to know what Dad really said?" I asked, taking the camera from Caleb's steady hands. "You want to hear what he actually thought about success and family and which of his children made him proud?" I looked out at the congregation, people who'd known our family for decades, who'd watched us grow up, who'd believed in the narrative of Marcus as the golden child and me as the quiet daughter who never amounted to much. Dad made this recording because he wanted the truth to be told, because he realized he'd spent 40 years being proud of the wrong things, celebrating the wrong achievements. I turned on the camera, and Dad's voice filled the chapel with startling clarity. My name is Robert Caldwell, and if someone is watching this, it means I'm gone and there are things that need to be said. Things I should have said years ago, but was too proud or too stubborn or too scared to admit. The effect was electric. People gasped, some cried out, others pressed their hands to their hearts. To hear Bobby Caldwell's voice again, speaking from beyond the grave with such clarity and purpose, was like witnessing a miracle. As the recording continued, as Dad systematically dismantled every lie Marcus had just told, as he spoke with brutal honesty about absence and presence, about money versus love, about real success versus the illusion of achievement, I watched the faces in the congregation change. Mrs. Henderson was crying openly. Tom Bradley was nodding with recognition. He'd been there for Dad's final construction, projects, had seen who really ran the business. Sarah Chen looked stunned, but not surprised. Teachers see family dynamics more clearly than most people realize. When Dad's voice said, "Rebecca is the child I'm most proud of. She's the one who truly understood what it means to be a Caldwell," the chapel erupted in a mix of gasps, sobs, and whispered conversations. Marcus stood frozen beside the casket, his perfect composure completely shattered. His wife had moved to shield their daughters, who looked mortified by this public revelation. But it was Marcus's face that captured the full impact of the moment. He looked like a man watching his carefully constructed identity collapse in real time. The recording ended with Dad's final words. "That's the truth. That's what I want. People to know. That's my final word on the matter." In the silence that followed, 300 people sat with the weight of what they'd just heard. Not just a father's deathbed confession, but a complete reversal of everything they thought they knew about the Caldwell family. And in that moment, I realized that Dad's final gift to me wasn't just validation. It was liberation. Liberation from 40 years of being invisible, from carrying the burden of everyone else's expectations, from apologizing for being the daughter who stayed instead of the son who left. The truth, as Dad had promised, had finally set us all free. The silence in the chapel stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. 300 people sat frozen, processing what they'd just witnessed. Not just the recording, but the complete upheaval of everything they thought they knew about the Caldwell family dynamics. Pastor Williams was the first to move, stepping forward with the practiced grace of someone who'd shepherded his congregation through decades of human drama. His voice, when he finally spoke, was gentle but firm. "Sometimes," he said, his words carrying easily through the chapel's acoustics, "the departed leave us with more than memories. Sometimes they leave us with truth that needs to be spoken, healing that needs to happen, and understanding that's been too long delayed." He looked directly at me, then at Marcus, then at Caleb, who was still standing beside Dad's casket holding the camera that had just changed everything. Robert Caldwell was a man of few words in life, but it seems he saved his most important words for last. Mrs. Henderson from the hardware store was the first from the congregation to move. She stood slowly from her pew in the middle section, her weathered hands gripping the back of the seat in front of her, and spoke in a voice that shook with emotion. "Bobby Caldwell built my back porch in 2019, she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. He was 74 years old, his arthritis was bad, but he insisted on doing it himself because he said that's what neighbors do for each other. And, Rebecca, honey, you were there every day, bringing him lunch, making sure he had his pain medication, cleaning up the work site." She turned to look at Marcus, who was still standing motionless beside the casket. I never saw you once during those 2 weeks, Marcus. Not once. Her words broke the dam. Tom Bradley, who'd worked construction with Dad for 15 years, stood up from his seat near the back. Bobby Caldwell was my business partner for the better part of 2 decades, he said, his gruff voice carrying the authority of someone who'd known Dad as a colleague, not just a neighbor. And I can tell you that when he started talking about retirement, about who was going to carry on his legacy, it wasn't your name that came up, Marcus. It was Rebecca's. Tom's wife, Linda, nodded vigorously from beside him. Rebecca ran the business side of Caldwell Construction for years. Everybody in town knew that. Bobby used to say she had a head for numbers that put him to shame. More people began to stand, and I realized something extraordinary was happening. The truth Dad had spoken on that recording was giving permission for other truths to be told, for observations that had been politely kept private to finally be voiced. Sarah Chen, my old high school teacher who now ran the community college's continuing education program, stood up from the third row. I've known this family for 30 years, she said, her teacher's voice carrying easily through the chapel. I watched both Marcus and Rebecca grow up, taught them both in my classroom. And I want to say something that maybe should have been said a long time ago. She turned to face the congregation, her gray hair catching the light from the stained glass windows. Success isn't just about how far you travel from home or how much money you make. Sometimes success is about staying, about showing up, about being there when people need you most. Rebecca Caldwell Mason embodies every value this community holds dear, and it's about time we acknowledge that. The affirmations continued. People shared memories of me helping during the tornado recovery, organizing food drives, volunteering at the school, managing Dad's construction business with integrity and skill, stories I'd forgotten, contributions I'd made without thinking they mattered, moments of service that had been noticed even when I thought I was invisible. But it was Marcus's reaction that broke my heart. He stood there beside Dad's casket, his expensive suit wrinkled now, his perfect hair disheveled from running his hands through it, looking like a man who'd just watched his entire identity crumble in public. His face cycled through emotions, anger, shame, confusion, and something that might have been grief, not just for Dad, but for the relationship he'd convinced himself existed. When the testimonials finally quieted, Marcus looked at me across the space between us, a distance that suddenly felt much larger than the few feet of chapel aisle. He started, then stopped, his usual confidence completely gone. I honestly thought, I believed that Dad and I had those conversations. I've been telling that story for so long that it felt real. His voice cracked on the last word. I sent money because that's what I know how to do. I solve problems with resources, with connections, with financial solutions. I didn't know what it meant to just be present. Sophia had moved to stand beside him, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely emotional rather than perfectly composed. We didn't visit because we thought you had everything under control, she said quietly, addressing me directly. Marcus would get off the phone with you and say that you were handling everything, that Dad was in good hands, that our presence would just complicate things. I could see she was trying to explain rather than excuse, but the words still stung. You were handling everything, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger but still shaky. You were so competent, so capable, so good at all of it that I convinced myself you didn't need help, that maybe you even preferred to do it alone. Caleb, who had been quietly observing this entire exchange, finally spoke up. Uncle Marcus, he said, his 17-year-old voice carrying a wisdom that surprised everyone. Mom didn't prefer to do it alone. She did it alone because she had to, because no one else was going to do it. The simple truth of his words hit Marcus like a physical blow. I watched my brother's face crumble as he finally understood the weight of what his absence had meant. I'm sorry, he whispered, and then louder. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. I was selfish and cowardly, and I let you carry everything while I told myself stories about why that was okay. He looked around the chapel, at all the faces of people who'd known our family for decades, who'd watched this dynamic play out without saying anything until today. I convinced myself that sending money was enough, that my success somehow honored Dad even if I wasn't here to honor him myself. But you're right. All of you are right. Money can't sit with someone when they're scared. Success can't hold someone's hand when they're dying. Marcus walked over to Dad's casket and placed his hand on the wood, his shoulders shaking with what I realized were silent sobs. "I'm sorry, Dad," he said quietly. "I'm sorry I wasn't the son you needed me to be. I'm sorry I let Rebecca carry everything alone. I'm sorry I built a life so far from you that I forgot what really mattered." The chapel was completely silent now, but it was a different kind of silence than before. This wasn't the shocked quiet of people witnessing a scandal. This was the reverent silence of people witnessing genuine repentance and the beginning of real healing. Pastor Williams stepped forward again, his voice gentle but clear. "Robert, Caldwell's final gift to his family wasn't just truth. It was the opportunity for redemption, the chance for relationships to be honest instead of comfortable, real instead of perfect." He looked at both Marcus and me. "The question now is what you do with that gift, whether you let this truth divide you further or whether you use it as the foundation for something better." I looked at Marcus, really looked at him, and saw not the polished, successful brother who'd overshadowed me my entire life, but a man who'd built his identity on achievements and accolades and was just now realizing how empty that could be. For the first time in decades, I saw vulnerability in his eyes instead of confidence. And despite everything, the years of feeling invisible, the months of carrying Dad's care alone, the pain of watching him lie at Dad's funeral, I felt something I hadn't expected. Compassion. The truth had been told. Dad's final wish had been honored. And now we had to decide what kind of family we were going to be going forward. 6 months have passed since that February afternoon, when Dad's voice filled St. Augustine's chapel with a truth that changed everything. The seasons have turned from the harsh Idaho winter through spring's tentative arrival to the full bloom of summer, and like the landscape around Millbrook Springs, our family has undergone its own transformation. The immediate aftermath of the I funeral was awkward, painful, and necessary. Marcus stayed in town for a full week, the longest he'd been home in over a decade, and we had conversations that should have happened years earlier. Not the polite, surface-level exchanges that had characterized our adult relationship, but raw, honest discussions about resentment, responsibility, and what it means to truly show up for the people you love. Marcus sold his cabin in Aspen. The decision surprised everyone, including Sophia, but he explained it to me during one of our long walks around the property where we'd grown up. "I bought that place because successful people are supposed to have mountain retreats," he said, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets as we walked past the creek where Dad had taught us to fish. But I realized I was building a life based on what success was supposed to look like instead of what actually mattered to me. He used the money from the sale to establish the Robert Caldwell Memorial Fund, which provides financial assistance to families dealing with Alzheimer's care. But more importantly, he restructured his role at TechFlow Solutions, stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on strategic planning, work he could do partially remote, allowing him to spend time in Millbrook Springs regularly. Madison and Mackenzie, his 15-year-old twins, were initially resistant to spending summers in what they called the middle of nowhere. But something remarkable happened when they got to know their grandfather's legacy through the community that remembered him. They started volunteering at the senior center, helping with technology classes that Marcus organized to bridge the digital divide for elderly residents. Watching them interact with people their grandfather had helped over the years, seeing them discover the satisfaction that comes from service rather than achievement, I began to understand that Dad's final message had ripple effects none of us anticipated. Sophia surprised me most of all. I'd always seen her as someone who valued appearances over authenticity, but the vulnerability that emerged after the funeral revelation showed me I'd been making assumptions based on limited interactions. She started coming to Millbrook Springs with Marcus, and during her visits, she'd spend hours going through Mom's old recipe collections and photo albums, piecing together family history she'd never been invited to explore. "I married Marcus because he was ambitious and successful," she told me during one of those quiet afternoons in Mom's kitchen. "But I fell in love with the man I saw that day in the chapel, the one who was finally brave enough to be honest about his failures." The business community in Seattle initially struggled with Marcus's reduced schedule and travel. Some investors questioned whether he was losing his competitive edge, but TechFlow's performance actually improved under his more strategic, less frantic leadership style. The company's focus shifted toward sustainable growth rather than aggressive expansion, and Marcus discovered that success built on sustainable foundations was more satisfying than success built on constant striving. For me, the changes were equally profound but more internal. The weight of carrying Dad's care alone had been crushing in ways I hadn't fully recognized until it was lifted. Not because the responsibilities decreased, Dad was gone, so those particular duties had ended, but because I was no longer carrying them in isolation. The community's recognition of my contributions at the funeral wasn't just about receiving long overdue acknowledgement. It was about finally understanding that my worth wasn't dependent on other people's approval or recognition. Dad's recording hadn't made me valuable. It had simply confirmed value that already existed. Caleb, who's now 18 and preparing for his freshman year at Idaho State University, has become something of a local legend. The story of the teenager who had the courage to demand truth at his grandfather's funeral has been told and retold throughout the county. But more than that, his example has inspired other young people to speak up when they see injustice or dishonesty in their own families and communities. "I learned something important that day," he told me recently as we were planning his college departure. "Truth isn't cruel when it's spoken with love. It's the lies we tell to protect people that end up hurting them most." He's majoring in social work with a focus on family counseling, inspired by witnessing how much healing became possible once our family stopped pretending everything was fine. The Robert Caldwell Memorial Fund has grown beyond what any of us expected. What started as Marcus's attempt at financial redemption has become a genuine community resource. We've helped over 40 families navigate the complexities of Alzheimer's care, providing not just money, but also support networks, respite care, and advocacy services. Working together on the fund has given Marcus and me a way to honor Dad's memory while building something positive from the wreckage of our fractured family dynamics. It's also shown both of us that our different strengths, his business acumen and my understanding of caregiving realities, can complement each other when we're working toward shared goals. The recording itself has taken on a life of its own. With Caleb's encouragement, I uploaded it to social media with the title, "What My Father Finally Said." The response was overwhelming. Thousands of comments from people sharing their own stories of being overlooked caregivers, of family members who disappeared during crises, of final conversations that brought healing or revealed truth. One comment in particular stayed with me. This gave me the courage to tell my own family how their absence during my husband's cancer treatment affected me. They didn't know how alone I felt because I never told them. Your father's honesty inspired my own. That's when I realized Dad's final gift extended far beyond our family. His willingness to speak difficult truths had given permission for others to do the same. Pastor Williams asked me to speak at the church's annual Caregivers Sunday service, and I've started receiving invitations to share our story at conferences, focused on elder care and family dynamics. It's strange to be recognized as an expert on something I learned through necessity rather than choice, But I've discovered that my experience resonates with people who've felt invisible in their own families. The house on Maple Creek Road still creaks at night, still whispers secrets through the walls. But they're different secrets now. Not the painful ones about who mattered and who didn't, but the gentle ones about healing and growth and second chances. Marcus visits monthly now, sometimes bringing his family, sometimes coming alone to sit in Dad's old workshop and learn to use the tools he never bothered to understand when Dad was alive to teach him. He's building a bench for Mom's grave marker, his first real construction project. And while his craftsmanship will never match Dad's, the effort itself is what matters. If I've learned anything from this experience, it's that truth, even when it comes too late to change the past, is never too late to change the future. Dad's recording didn't undo 40 years of misplaced priorities, but it created the foundation for different choices going forward. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never found that camera, if Dad's final message had remained unheard, if Marcus had been allowed to maintain his comfortable fiction about their relationship. Would we have continued the old patterns? Would I have remained invisible while he claimed credit for a connection that existed only in his imagination? But then I remember Caleb's courage in that chapel, the moment when a 17-year-old decided that truth mattered more than comfort. And I know we made the right choice. The most beautiful part of this entire experience has been watching how honesty, even painful honesty, can become the foundation for genuine love rather than performed affection. Marcus and I don't have a perfect relationship now. We're still learning how to be honest with each other after decades of polite distance. But it's real in a way it never was before. And that's enough. More than enough. If you're listening to this story and recognizing pieces of your own family dynamics, if you're the one carrying invisible burdens while someone else gets the credit, if you're tired of pretending that comfortable lies are better than difficult truths, I want you to know. Your contributions matter, your sacrifices are seen, and your story deserves to be told. Sometimes it takes a child to say what adults are afraid to voice. Sometimes it takes a deathbed confession to reveal what living conversations couldn't. Sometimes it takes a moment of public confrontation to create space for private healing. But always, always, it takes courage to choose truth over comfort, authenticity over appearance, and real love over performed affection. Dad's final gift to our family wasn't just validation or vindication. It was the reminder that it's never too late to start being honest about who we are and what we mean to each other. And sometimes, that's exactly what love looks like. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.